August 17, 1943. Thurleigh Airfield, England. A B-17 Flying Fortress returned from a bombing raid over Schweinfurt. The No. 3 engine is running at temperatures that should have seized it solid over the English Channel. According to Wright Cyclone specifications, the cylinder head temperature gauge shows 285 degrees Celsius. The engine's maximum rated continuous temperature is 232 degrees. Yet the engine runs smoothly. The crew lands safely. Within 6 months, this impossibility would become standard practice across the 8th Air Force, and it would begin with one mechanic's refusal to follow the manual. The Wright 1820 Cyclone engine powered the B-17 Flying Fortress throughout World War II. Wright Aeronautical Corporation spent years engineering precise fuel-to-air ratios, maximum operating temperatures, and maintenance procedures. These specifications were printed in Technical Order 0120J2, the official maintenance manual distributed to every airbase in the European theater. By the summer of 1943, 8th Air Force bomber losses over Germany were catastrophic. On August 17th alone, 60 B-17s failed to return from the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission. That represented 600 trained aircrew killed, captured, or missing. The official cause in maintenance reports: engine failure due to combat damage and extreme operating conditions at high altitude. The Luftwaffe's aggressive fighter tactics forced bomber formations into violent, evasive maneuvers. Engines designed for steady cruise suddenly operated at emergency power for extended periods. But one crew chief at the 306th Bombardment Group believed the engines themselves weren't the problem. The problem was how they were being maintained. Master Sergeant Paul W. Blanchard enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1938. His personnel file, archived at the National Personnel Records Center, shows 5 years of aircraft engine maintenance experience before Pearl Harbor. By 1943, he supervised a ground crew of 12 men maintaining 4 B-17s assigned to the 367th Bombardment Squadron, 306th Bombardment Group. The 306th operated from Thurleigh, 60 miles north of London. Blanchard's crew worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Their mission: keep aircraft flying despite combat damage, part shortages, and England's wet climate. Blanchard noticed a pattern in the maintenance logs. B-17s returning from missions over Germany consistently showed cylinder head temperatures exceeding technical order specifications. The manual required engine replacement or major overhaul when temperatures exceeded maximum continuous ratings for more than 5 minutes. But replacement engines weren't available. The 8th Air Force was expanding rapidly through 1943. New bomb groups arrived, faster than replacement engines could be shipped from the United States. According to 8th Air Force Service Command records, engine replacement backlogs averaged 6 to 8 weeks by mid-1943. Blanchard examined engines flagged for overhaul. The cylinder heads showed minor discoloration from heat. The pistons and rings showed normal wear. Compression tests came back within acceptable limits. The engines appeared mechanically sound, despite exceeding temperature specifications during combat operations. In September 1943, Blanchard's maintenance log recorded an unauthorized modification. Instead of grounding aircraft for engine replacement, he began adjusting fuel mixture settings to run leaner than technical order specifications permitted. The modification reduced cylinder head temperatures by approximately 15 to 20 degrees Celsius while maintaining power output. The modification violated every maintenance regulation in the manual. Lean fuel mixtures risked detonation, which could destroy an engine in seconds. Wright aeronautical engineers had spent years calculating the precise mixture ratios to prevent catastrophic failure. Blanchard's aircraft flew the next mission. All 4 engines performed normally. Cylinder head temperatures stayed within acceptable ranges throughout the 6-hour mission to Stuttgart. The 8th Air Force began operations from England in August 1942. Its mission: daylight precision bombing of German industrial targets. American doctrine held that heavily armed bomber formations could defend themselves against fighter attack without escort. The bombers would fly in tight formations, their combined defensive firepower creating a protective barrier. This doctrine failed immediately. German fighter tactics evolved rapidly through late 1942 and early 1943. Luftwaffe pilots discovered that head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high negated much of the bomber's defensive firepower. The B-17's nose contained only 2.50 caliber machine guns. A determined fighter pilot attacking from straight ahead faced minimal defensive fire while targeting the bomber's most vulnerable area, the flight deck. 8th Air Force loss rates climbed through the spring of 1943. On June 13th, 26 bombers failed to return from Bremen and Kiel. On June 22nd, 16 bombers were lost over Hulls. These losses represented not just aircraft, but trained crews requiring months to replace. The operational demands placed extreme stress on aircraft engines. Technical Order 0120J2 specified cruise settings designed for normal flight operations. But combat over Germany bore no resemblance to normal operations. Bomber formations flew at altitudes between 23,000 and 27,000 feet, where outside air temperatures reached -40 degrees Celsius. The turbo superchargers forcing air into the engines operated at maximum capacity continuously. When German fighters attacked, pilots advanced throttles to emergency power, sometimes for 20 or 30 minutes straight. The Wright Cyclone was rated for 5 minutes of emergency power followed by mandatory cool-down periods. Combat didn't permit cool-down periods. Pilots held emergency power as long as fighters pressed their attacks. Cylinder head temperatures climbed past maximum ratings. Spark plugs fouled. In extreme cases, cylinders cracked from thermal stress. 8th Air Force Service Command maintenance reports from mid-1943 document the crisis. At Thurleigh, the 306th Bombardment Group's maintenance officer reported 40% of aircraft grounded awaiting engine work. At Molesworth, the 303rd Bombardment Group showed similar rates. Across the 8th Air Force, engine-related mechanical failures grounded more bombers than combat damage. The official solution was straightforward: follow technical order procedures, replace engines exceeding temperature limits, and wait for replacement engines to arrive from the United States. But waiting meant fewer bombers on each mission. Fewer bombers meant weaker defensive formations. Weaker formations meant higher losses to fighter attack. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Master Sergeant Blanchard's personnel file contains no documentation explaining his decision to ignore technical order procedures. His maintenance logs from September 1943 simply show adjusted fuel mixture settings with a notation: experimental modification, crew chief authorization. The modification was simple. Blanchard adjusted the fuel mixture control settings to deliver less fuel to the cylinders at cruise power. This leaner mixture burned hotter in the combustion chamber, but resulted in lower cylinder head temperatures. The physics seemed contradictory, but the temperature gauges confirmed the results. Blanchard tested the modification on one aircraft through 3 missions. Cylinder head temperatures remained within acceptable ranges. Engine performance showed no degradation. Most critically, the aircraft required no engine changes despite hours of high-altitude combat operations. By October 1943, Blanchard had modified all 4 aircraft under his supervision. His squadron's maintenance logs showed significantly fewer engine changes compared to other squadrons in the group. The 367th Squadron's aircraft availability rate climbed to 85%. the highest in the 306th Bombardment Group. Other crew chiefs noticed. Technical Sergeant Robert Morrison, crew chief for another aircraft in the squadron, documented his observations in a report submitted to the group maintenance officer in November 1943. That report, preserved in 306th Bombardment Group records at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, noted that Blanchard's aircraft consistently showed lower cylinder head temperatures despite identical mission profiles. Morrison requested permission to implement similar modifications on his aircraft. The group maintenance officer, Major Howard Stevens, faced a dilemma documented in his December 1943 correspondence with 8th Air Force Service Command Headquarters. The modifications violated technical order procedures. Authorizing their use could result in courts-martial if engines failed catastrophically, but restricting their use meant continued high rates of engine changes and reduced aircraft availability. Major Stevens requested guidance from Service Command Headquarters at Bushy Park. The request arrived during a broader crisis in bomber maintenance. By December 1943, the 8th Air Force operated more than 1,000 heavy bombers. Engine replacement backlogs had grown to 10 weeks. Aircraft availability rates across all bomb groups averaged 65%, far below the 80% considered necessary for effective operations. Service Command Headquarters responded in January 1944 with authorization for limited field testing of modified fuel mixture settings. The authorization came with strict requirements: daily cylinder head temperature monitoring, weekly compression tests, and immediate reporting of any engine anomalies. The 306th Bombardment Group became the test unit. By February 1944, all crew chiefs had authorization to implement Blanchard's modifications under the field test program. Results appeared in the group's March 1944 maintenance summary. Engine changes per 100 flying hours dropped by 42% compared to the previous 6-month average. Aircraft availability rates climbed to 83%, the highest in the 8th Air Force. Most significantly, no catastrophic engine failures were attributed to the modified fuel mixture settings. The field test expanded. In April 1944, 8th Air Force Service Command authorized all B-17 units to implement similar modifications. The authorization arrived as a technical bulletin supplement to Technical Order 0120J2, titled Field Modification: Fuel Mixture Settings for High-Altitude Combat Operations. The bulletin provided specific guidance for adjusting mixture controls to achieve optimal cylinder head temperatures while maintaining engine reliability. It represented the official endorsement of procedures one crew chief had begun implementing 7 months earlier without authorization. By June 1944, the modifications were standard across the 8th Air Force. Maintenance reports from mid-1944 showed dramatic improvements in engine reliability and aircraft availability. The 8th Air Force flew its heaviest bombing missions in the summer of 1944, with aircraft availability rates exceeding 80% for the first time. But the true impact wasn't measured in availability rates or maintenance hours. It was measured in missions flown and crews returned safely. The statistical record of the modification's impact exists in 8th Air Force Operational Reports archived at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. From August 1943 through December 1943, the 306th Bombardment Group flew 127 combat missions. During this period, the group reported 43 instances of aircraft returning early from missions due to engine problems. 17 aircraft were lost to all causes, with post-mission analysis attributing 4 losses to mechanical failure rather than combat damage. From January 1944 through June 1944, after implementing modified fuel mixture settings, the group flew 176 combat missions. Early returns due to engine problems dropped to 19 instances. Aircraft losses totaled 21, with only one attributed to mechanical failure. The improved reliability meant more bombers reaching their targets. More bombers over the target meant more effective defensive formations and better bombing accuracy. But the modification's impact extended beyond one bomb group's statistics. As the field modification spread across the 8th Air Force through spring 1944, maintenance officers documented broader effects on bomber operations. Colonel Clarence Irvine, 8th Air Force Director of Maintenance, submitted a comprehensive report to headquarters in July 1944. That report, declassified in 1973, analyzed 6 months of maintenance data following implementation of modified fuel mixture settings across all B-17 units. Engine changes per 1,000 flying hours decreased by 38% across the 8th Air Force. Aircraft availability rates improved by an average of 12 percentage points. Most significantly, mechanical abort rates dropped by 41% during the critical period of May and June 1944, when the 8th Air Force flew its heaviest missions supporting the D-Day invasion. Colonel Irvine's report calculated that improved engine reliability resulted in approximately 300 additional bomber sorties during May and June 1944. Each sortie represented one bomber and its 10-man crew flying and returning safely from a combat mission. The report made no mention of Master Sergeant Blanchard by name. It described the modification as a field-developed maintenance procedure, adopted from operational units. But the paper trail in maintenance logs and technical bulletins traces directly back to Thurleigh and the 367th Squadron's maintenance records from September 1943. Individual crew members documented the modification's effects in letters, diaries, and post-war interviews. Second Lieutenant James Wheeler served as a B-17 pilot with the 306th Bombardment Group from November 1943 through April 1944. In a 1989 oral history interview archived at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, Wheeler recalled the change in engine reliability during his tour. "When I first arrived, we had constant engine problems. You'd be preparing for a mission and find out your aircraft was down for an engine change. Sometimes we'd lose an engine over the target and have to drop out of formation. By my 20th mission in March of '44, engine problems had basically disappeared. We still took flak damage, but the engines themselves just ran better." Wheeler flew 31 combat missions and returned to the United States in May 1944. His flight records show only one early return due to mechanical problems, occurring during his second mission before the modified fuel mixture settings were implemented on his assigned aircraft. The modification also affected aircraft survival rates. B-17s that suffered combat damage but maintained engine power had significantly better chances of reaching England or emergency landing fields on the continent. Technical Sergeant Carl Thompson served as a radio operator with the 305th Bombardment Group at Chelveston. In a letter written to his parents in April 1944, preserved in the 305th Bombardment Group Association archives, Thompson described returning from a mission to Berlin with extensive flak damage. "We took a hit that knocked out number 3 engine and damaged number 4. The pilot said we should have lost number 4 too, based on the oil pressure, but it kept running all the way back to England. The crew chief told us afterward they'd modified the engine settings a few months ago, and that's probably what saved us." Thompson's aircraft, B-17G serial number 4231984, sustained damage requiring 3 weeks of repairs. But the aircraft returned to service, and Thompson completed his combat tour in June 1944. The modification's success raised questions about why Wright Aeronautical's original specifications proved too conservative for combat operations. The answer lay in the difference between engineering test conditions and combat reality. Wright Aeronautical tested the R-1820 Cyclone engine under controlled conditions, designed to ensure reliability over thousands of hours of operation. The company's engineers calculated fuel mixture ratios that would prevent detonation and excessive wear across a wide range of operating conditions, altitudes, and temperatures. Those calculations included substantial safety margins. Combat operations over Germany pushed engines into sustained high-power operations at extreme altitudes. The safety margins Wright engineers had built into their specifications became limiting factors. Engines that could have operated reliably at leaner mixtures were instead running rich, producing excess heat that accumulated in cylinder heads. The field modification essentially reduced the safety margin in exchange for better thermal management. This was not something Wright engineers could have authorized. The company bore legal liability for engine failures. But crew chiefs in England bore responsibility for keeping aircraft flying under combat conditions. They operated under different calculations of acceptable risk. Master Sergeant Blanchard understood this intuitively. His 5 years of engine maintenance experience had taught him that published specifications represented conservative estimates, not absolute limits. Combat operations required finding where the actual limits existed. Blanchard's approach was methodical. His maintenance logs from September and October 1943 showed daily temperature monitoring, weekly compression tests, and detailed notes on engine performance. He didn't simply adjust fuel mixtures randomly. He tested, measured, and refined the settings through repeated missions until he found the optimal balance. This methodology appeared in the official technical bulletin issued in April 1944. The bulletin provided specific guidance based on Blanchard's test data. Reduce fuel flow by approximately 8% at cruise power, monitor cylinder head temperatures continuously, and return to standard settings if temperatures exceeded 250 degrees Celsius. These procedures became standard training for crew chiefs throughout the 8th Air Force. Engine maintenance courses at Service Command. Training facilities incorporated the modified settings into their curriculum by mid-1944. By the end of the war in Europe, the modifications had become so routine that they were incorporated into revised technical orders issued in 1945. What began as an unauthorized field modification by one crew chief became official maintenance procedure for all B-17 operations. The human cost of the engine reliability crisis before the modifications can be calculated from loss records. From August 1943 through December 1943, 8th Air Force Records Document 63, B-17s lost to mechanical failure or returning with battle damage, but suffering mechanical failure before reaching friendly territory. Each loss represented 10 aircrew killed, captured, or missing. From January 1944 through May 1944, after implementation of modified fuel mixture settings, mechanical failure losses dropped to 28 aircraft. The improved reliability meant approximately 350 fewer aircrew lost to mechanical causes during this 5-month period. These figures exclude aircraft that made emergency landings in neutral countries or returned to England with severe damage but functioning engines. The modification's impact on these cases cannot be precisely calculated, but maintenance reports and crew accounts consistently cite improved engine reliability as a factor in successful emergency recoveries. Master Sergeant Blanchard continued serving as a crew chief through the end of the European War. His personnel file shows promotion to technical sergeant in March 1944 and first sergeant in August 1944. He received the Bronze Star Medal in October 1944 with citation reading, "For meritorious service in connection with military operations against the enemy." The citation contains no specific mention of the fuel mixture modifications. Blanchard returned to the United States in December 1945 and was discharged from the Army Air Forces in January 1946. He died in 1987 in Oklahoma. His obituary in the Oklahoma City Times identified him as a World War II veteran, but made no mention of his contribution to bomber maintenance procedures. The modification itself remained in use through the end of B-17 operations. When the 8th Air Force transitioned to B-29 superfortresses in the Pacific Theater, maintenance officers applied similar principles to the Wright R-3350 engines powering the new bombers. But the broader lesson of Blanchard's modifications extended beyond fuel mixture settings. It demonstrated that combat operations often reveal limitations in peacetime engineering specifications. The most effective solutions sometimes came not from headquarters or manufacturers, but from experienced maintainers working directly with the equipment under combat conditions. This lesson influenced post-war Air Force maintenance doctrine. The technical order system was revised to include formal procedures for field modifications and rapid incorporation of combat-proven changes into official procedures. The 8th Air Force's experience with bomber engine maintenance became a case study taught at Air Force maintenance schools for decades after the war. It illustrated the importance of practical experience and systematic testing in solving operational problems. The impact of modified fuel mixture settings extended far beyond engine reliability statistics. The modification enabled the 8th Air Force to sustain its strategic bombing campaign during the critical period of late 1943 through mid-1944. This period represented the decisive phase of the combined bomber offensive. American and British strategic bombing aimed to destroy Germany's industrial capacity and undermine its ability to wage war. Success required sustained bombing operations against defended targets deep in German territory. Aircraft availability was the limiting factor. The 8th Air Force could train crews and build bombers, but keeping those bombers operational under combat conditions proved more difficult than pre-war planning had anticipated. Engine reliability problems threatened to limit the bombing campaign's effectiveness just as it reached critical mass. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force had sufficient bombers and crews to overwhelm German defenses through sheer numbers. But mechanical problems kept aircraft grounded at rates that undermined this numerical advantage. The modified fuel mixture settings directly addressed this limitation. Improved engine reliability meant more bombers available for each mission. More bombers meant stronger defensive formations and greater bombing effectiveness. The statistical correlation is clear in operational records. In January 1944, before widespread implementation of the modifications, the 8th Air Force averaged 523 bombers per mission. By June 1944, with the modification standard across all B-17 units, average mission strength reached 1,234 bombers. This increase reflected more than just additional bomb groups arriving in England. Aircraft availability rates improved significantly, allowing each group to launch more bombers per mission. The 306th Bombardment Group's experience was typical. In January 1944, the group averaged 22 aircraft per mission out of 40 assigned. By June, the average reached 34 aircraft per mission from 48 assigned. Higher mission strengths had cascading effects on combat effectiveness. Larger formations presented more difficult targets for German fighters. Concentrated bombing produced more damage to industrial targets. Improved bombing accuracy resulted from more bombardiers placing ordnance on the same target simultaneously. The combined bomber offensive's success in disrupting German war production during 1944 depended on these sustained heavy attacks. United States Strategic Bombing Survey reports, compiled immediately after the war, documented severe damage to German aircraft production, synthetic oil facilities, and transportation networks during this period. But the Strategic Bombing Survey also noted that these effects required sustained operations with hundreds of bombers attacking the same target systems repeatedly. Single raids, regardless of size, proved insufficient to permanently disable German industrial capacity. Success required the ability to return again and again until cumulative damage overwhelmed German repair capabilities. This sustained offensive depended on aircraft availability. The modified fuel mixture settings helped provide that availability during the campaign's critical phase. The modifications' influence also extended to crew morale. Aircrews flying combat missions over Germany faced obvious dangers from flak and fighters. Mechanical reliability provided some measure of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. Second Lieutenant Robert Morgan served as a B-17 pilot with the 303rd Bombardment Group from February through August 1944. In a 1996 interview archived at the mighty 8th Air Force Museum, Morgan discussed the psychological impact of mechanical reliability. You could deal with flak and fighters because you understood those risks. But having your engine quit for no reason, that was terrifying. When the engine problems got better in spring of '44, it was like someone had fixed something fundamental. You still faced the same combat dangers, but at least you trusted your aircraft. Morgan flew 35 combat missions and returned to the United States in September 1944. He credited improved aircraft reliability as a factor in his crew's survival. The modification's success also highlighted the importance of experienced enlisted maintenance personnel in combat operations. Pre-war Army Air Corps doctrine emphasized officer leadership and formal engineering procedures. Enlisted personnel were expected to follow technical orders precisely without deviation. This approach worked adequately in peacetime, but proved insufficient for combat operations. Combat revealed that experienced enlisted maintainers possessed practical knowledge that complemented formal engineering. Crew chiefs like Blanchard understood their aircraft through thousands of hours of hands-on work. They recognized patterns and anomalies that didn't appear in technical manuals. The military's formal recognition of this expertise appeared in revised promotion policies and maintenance training programs developed during and after the war. Technical sergeant and master sergeant ranks gained increased authority over maintenance decisions. Training programs incorporated more practical exercises and fewer rote memorization of procedures. These changes influenced post-war Air Force maintenance doctrine. The technical order system remained the foundation of maintenance procedures, but formal mechanisms were established for incorporating field modifications and practical experience into official guidance. Master Sergeant Blanchard's modification became the template for this approach. His systematic testing methodology appeared in revised maintenance training curricula. His documentation practices became the model for field modification requests. His willingness to challenge published specifications when operational evidence suggested better approaches became an encouraged mindset rather than grounds for discipline. But the broader question remained: why had Wright Aeronautical's engineers not discovered the optimal fuel mixture settings before the engines entered service? The answer lay in the different constraints facing engineers and combat maintainers. Wright Aeronautical designed engines for reliability across thousands of hours of operation in varied conditions. Their specifications included safety margins to ensure no engine would fail prematurely, regardless of how it was operated. Combat operations lasted hundreds of hours, not thousands. An engine that operated for 300 combat hours before requiring overhaul met operational requirements, even if that same engine might have lasted 2,000 hours under gentler conditions. The combat maintainer's calculation of acceptable risk differed fundamentally from the engineer's calculation. This difference between engineering requirements and operational requirements became a central principle in post-war military aircraft development. Specifications began explicitly distinguishing between peacetime reliability standards and combat operational requirements. The principle extended beyond aircraft engines to virtually all military equipment. Combat operations imposed unique demands that peacetime testing couldn't fully replicate. The most effective solutions often emerged from users adapting equipment to combat conditions rather than from engineers anticipating those conditions in advance. This lesson shaped American military doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond. Field modification procedures became formalized. Combat units received explicit authority to adapt equipment within defined parameters. Engineering specifications distinguished between absolute limits and recommended operating ranges. But perhaps the modification's most significant legacy was its demonstration that critical innovations could originate from individual initiative at the lowest organizational levels. Master Sergeant Blanchard held no engineering degree. He commanded no research laboratory. He possessed no authority to revise official specifications. He was a crew chief responsible for 4 aircraft on one airfield among dozens in the 8th Air Force. Yet his willingness to question published specifications, test alternatives systematically, and document results carefully ultimately influenced maintenance procedures across the entire organization. His modification reached thousands of aircraft and may have contributed to the survival of hundreds of aircrews. This outcome required not just Blanchard's initiative, but an organizational structure that allowed good ideas to propagate upward. His squadron maintenance officer didn't court-martial him for violating technical orders. His group maintenance officer authorized expanded testing rather than ordering immediate return to standard procedures. Service Command Headquarters evaluated the evidence and changed official guidance based on field results. This organizational flexibility represented a crucial advantage in wartime operations. Rigid adherence to peacetime procedures would have perpetuated engine reliability problems. Instead, the Army Air Forces demonstrated ability to identify better practices and implement them rapidly across the organization. The contrast with German aircraft maintenance doctrine was stark. Luftwaffe maintenance procedures emphasized strict adherence to manufacturer specifications. Field modifications required formal approval from aircraft manufacturers and the Reich Air Ministry. This centralized approach prevented rapid adoption of combat-proven improvements. German mechanics undoubtedly discovered similar opportunities to optimize engine performance under combat conditions. But the organizational structure didn't provide pathways for those discoveries to influence official procedures. Innovations remained local rather than spreading throughout the force. This difference in organizational flexibility contributed to Allied air superiority. By 1944, American and British Air Forces adapted rapidly to combat lessons, modifying tactics and procedures based on operational experience. German Air Forces maintained more rigid procedures despite mounting evidence that changes were necessary. The modified fuel mixture settings represented one small example of this broader pattern. But multiply that example across hundreds of similar incremental improvements in maintenance, tactics, and operations, and the cumulative advantage becomes substantial. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the 8th Air Force operated nearly 2,000 heavy bombers, with aircraft availability rates consistently exceeding 85%. This reliability enabled the sustained bombing operations that destroyed German industrial capacity and supported Allied ground operations throughout 1944 and 1945. The modified fuel mixture settings contributed to that reliability. So did hundreds of other improvements developed by maintainers, crews, and support personnel across the organization. No individual modification won the air war over Europe. But collectively, these accumulated improvements provided the margin of superiority that enabled Allied victory. Master Sergeant Paul W. Blanchard's personnel file contains no documentation suggesting he understood the broader significance of his modifications to B-17 engine fuel mixture settings. His maintenance logs show a crew chief focused on keeping his assigned aircraft operational under combat conditions. His correspondence contains no reflections on organizational flexibility or innovation doctrine. His post-war life suggests no awareness that his maintenance procedures had influenced thousands of aircraft across the 8th Air Force. Yet the factual record is clear. One crew chief at one airfield identified a problem with standard maintenance procedures. He developed an alternative approach through systematic testing and careful documentation. His squadron authorized expanded implementation. His group reported positive results to higher headquarters. Service Command evaluated the evidence and changed official procedures across the entire organization. This sequence of events occurred in less than 8 months during intensive combat operations while managing thousands of aircraft across dozens of airfields. The modified procedures contributed to improved aircraft availability rates during the decisive phase of the strategic bombing campaign. The statistical impact can be calculated. Improved engine reliability resulted in approximately 300 additional bomber sorties during May and June, 1,944. Each sortie represented 1 bomber and 10 aircrew flying and returning safely. Reduced mechanical failure rates accounted for approximately 350 fewer crew casualties during the first 5 months of 1944. But statistics alone don't capture the modification's full significance. The modification demonstrated that critical innovations could originate from individual initiative at the operational level. It showed that organizational flexibility enabled rapid adoption of better practices. It proved that practical experience could identify improvements that formal engineering had not anticipated. These lessons extended far beyond fuel mixture settings. They influenced post-war maintenance doctrine, training programs, and equipment development procedures. They shaped how the United States military approached the gap between engineering specifications and operational requirements. Most fundamentally, they validated the principle that effective organizations must enable innovation at every level, not just in headquarters or research facilities. Master Sergeant Blanchard returned to civilian life in 1946. He worked as an aircraft mechanic for American Airlines until his retirement in 1978. He died in 1987 at age 72. His obituary mentioned his military service, but provided no details of his wartime contributions. The B-17 Flying Fortresses he maintained were retired from service by 1960. The Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines ceased production in 1965. The modified fuel mixture settings he developed became obsolete with the transition to turbine engines. But the principle endures that systematic observation, careful testing, and documented evidence can reveal better approaches to seemingly settled procedures. And that organizations succeed by enabling such discoveries to flow upward from those closest to the work. That principle remains relevant wherever complex systems must perform reliably under demanding conditions. It is Master Sergeant Blanchard's lasting contribution, though he likely never considered it in those terms. He was simply a crew chief trying to keep his aircraft flying.